Hello, lovely people. So, welcome to story time. I'm Dottie, and yeah, I know that I'm early, but I am just sitting out in my yard because it's hot as fuck in my house, and it's honestly not that cooler out here. But yeah, I figured I'd start early. Sufanelli, hey. But yeah, I'm starting early, and I'm sitting out in my yard, and I figured why not start. I still won't start reading until 8. Let the people file in, but we can smoke some science if you care to. But I figured we could just chat and whatnot for a few minutes before we get into the story time because it's not going to stay light too much later. But yeah, let the people get in here if they're gonna. And I'm on my phone, and so I'm just not really sure of the capabilities of this device. Definitely not used to it. So yeah, Kirk, I would give out wrenches, but I don't want to exit out of this because I might not get back into it. So it's always fun. But yeah, so kind of some exciting news. I don't want to jinx it. He's gone Hollywood on us. Yeah. Aren't these awesome? Got these for my road trip, and I love them. So, figure if I was going to be outside, why not? Why not have the shades on? And but yeah, so I'm going to look at an RV next week, and just really hoping and praying that everything works out with it. Because if it does, I will be living in this RV, and I am really excited about it. And it's a drivable one. The guy said that he rebuilt the engine and then it runs really great. But yeah, I'm super excited. If I actually get it, then I'll be renovating it and moving into an RV. So super excited about that. And it's super cool. It's all like painted and looks real artistic on the outside. And he said that he was starting to redo the inside. And hey, Stinchman. But yeah, so he said he's starting to redo the inside, and it still needs some stuff done, which is perfect because I have wanted an RV for a while and wanted to redo the inside. So I've been watching a ton of RV renovation videos and just getting different ideas. And there's so many cool things that you can do with the RV. One that I watched today, the lady, they painted the whole interior white, and then in her kitchen she got these just stick on, they're like stickers basically, but it looked like a fancy tile, and it just stuck on like wallpaper basically. It like peeled off in these little like squares, and then she just stuck those on, and then it looked like a really nice fancy tile. So that was a really cool idea because it just makes your kitchen look, you know, just less like RV, and more like an actual kitchen. And so yeah, I like that a lot. But yeah, really hoping that everything works out with it because I definitely need to get my own place. And yeah, just been wanting an RV for a really long time. I was going to build a tiny house, but with the cost of lumber right now, it's just not feasible to do that. But if I get an RV, then I can live in that and, redo it. And like it's already got the structure there. It just needs, the inside redone how I want it. So, yeah, super excited for that. Really hoping that it works out. Because, yeah, I mean, things are they're getting really crazy out there. And I just really want to like have a community and get land and basically build my own town, because everything else is getting just insane. And yeah, my job is coming to an end, which I knew that it was going to. Wow, that's terrible, Singeman. Says I'm quite angry. Denied food purchase, called cops on me. Yeah, filmed it, uploaded. Yeah, I mean, you have to do that really, because it's just, I don't even know. It's so exhausting right now. This whole year and a half has been very just tiresome on those of us who can see. And yeah. But anyway, my job, I've known that it was going to end. It's a seasonal job. So I'm a garden merchandiser for this company. And so I put out the plant displays for Walmart. And so this job goes from February to October. So I've known that it was going to end. But now, being in the last month and a half or whatever of it actually coming to an end, yeah, I'm definitely realizing I need a new job, and it's getting harder to find one that isn't just straight up retarded. I'm dodging mosquitoes. Yeah, I know that I will slightly regret doing my stream out here because I will get eaten by mosquitoes, but it is starting to cool down out here, so you know what? We're just going to deal with it. We never stream outside, so I thought it would be kind of fun. This is my garden here, a little bit of it. This tomato plant, if I stood up, it's actually taller than me, which is really awesome. And yeah, I got some zucchinis down here in bags, and a little garden bed back behind here, and that's got some green beans on it, on the trellis that I made, and a couple other kinds of squash. And yeah, just I thought it might be nice, nice backdrop to have my yard and my garden, my yarden. But yeah, I am looking for a new job now, and one of the weed stores that I applied to, it said on the website that masks are required for everyone unless you've been fully, vaccinated. And yeah, I don't know. I thought about maybe going back to Amazon delivery, but yeah, it's getting really hard to find places that aren't requiring this stuff. And I don't know. I'm going to just, I really don't want to talk about it much because I don't want to be discouraged and be down and whatnot. But it's just very difficult being awake to all this, and the majority of people are for the nonsense, and the peer pressure is getting it's getting exhausting and getting frankly infuriating, because yeah, I mean, we're being pressured from everyone and everywhere. So but time is at 7:52. Okay. Want to join together. Yeah, I mean, really, that's what we have to do at this point. I feel like we have to build communities, because if we don't, I mean, who else is going to have our back? So, it's like your random neighbors in cities that don't care about you. They're not going to have your back. And yeah, community is really, I mean, that's the way to go, because everyone has a skill that they can bring to the community, but it's like it gets to where if you have a big enough community, eventually someone's gonna want to like lead it, and I don't know. I just really, I do want a good community. Like, I wish that I could just buy, 100 acres or whatever, and everybody there just kind of does their own thing, but also helps take care of everyone. And I know there are enough, I know there are enough flat Earth people and bears and people like that who are tired of all of it, and they do want that. And it's just really finding people who are serious about it, not just like, oh yeah, that's nice wishful thinking, but it's not feasible, whatever. Which, I mean, I get it, because I don't have money to just buy 100 acres. But really, if there's enough of us, we can do really great things if we just come together. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where things are gonna go. But yeah, I'm super hopeful that I get my RV. That'll be really exciting. And yeah, just hoping and praying that I can get a job that is not too terrible, because I mean, I don't really want to do something like OnlyFans. Like, come on, don't make me sell my freaking pictures to weirdos. That just, I want to sell my zucchini to people, or like trade my zucchini. I just I don't know. I hate that money is such a factor that makes this world work. But there's so many other currencies, and yeah, I'm not too worried about finding a job, because there's a million places that are hiring, but it's definitely getting to the point of like, well, what are you willing to do for that job? And so just kind of hoping that I can find something that isn't too ridiculous. I mean, there's some things obviously that I'm not going to do. And I don't care what job it is. There's things that I'm not willing to do. So they told the cops I attacked them. Isn't that illegal? Yeah, apparently, I mean, people can just discriminate against you and harass you, and all of that is okay because you decided to be selfish and not cover your breathing hole, and not submit to straight up tyranny. So they think that, oh, we're allowed to do this because you're beneath us. And yeah, it's really insane. Really is. 3 minutes till start time. Hopefully I don't knock my phone over. Give me 1 second. I'm just checking my messages, making sure everything is good, no one is dying, anything like that. Okay. So what's going on with everybody else? See if Eric gets in here. He likes story time. Maybe Zulu One will join too. Just never know. You never know who might show up to story time. But yeah, I came out today, and let's see. Well, 3 of my tomatoes are in cages, and the 4th plant I never put it in a cage, and it's the only one that has a slicer tomato on it. All three of the other plants are cherry style tomatoes, which I've eaten a solid handful of those as they have ripened. They all ripen at different times, so I'm not like able to harvest a bunch and put them in a salad or anything like that, but I eat them as they come ripe, and they've all been quite good. But yeah, the one slicer tomato I have, it's a big beef variety, and it's pretty good sized. Yeah, like probably almost as the size of a baseball. And I came out today, and that plant had like fallen over because the tomato is so heavy on it, and so I had to like stand it up and prop it against the other tomato next to it, that tomato cage. But yeah, super excited for that. This is the first year that I have successfully grown tomatoes, and all my plants were bought starts from the store, and they're all doing awesome. I think I still have about 70 tomatoes. Yeah, I think I have about 70 tomatoes that are growing and about to ripen, so they're doing quite well. And Michelle L., hello and welcome. Damn, it's still daylight. Where are you? Yeah, I am on the West Coast, so the sun has not quite left my side of the realm. Carrie Skates, hello, hello. So, yeah, I'm just out in my yard. It's hot as can be in my house, and I just didn't even want to deal with it. So I'm sitting out in my yard in here, and I was just talking about my tomato love. But we are about to get this thing started. So, hello everyone, welcome to Story Time. I'm Dottie, of course, and I'll be your host for this fine evening, and we are almost done with this book. It's crazy how fast this one is going. Because we have 2 chapters. Yes, I was giving a garden tour, talking about my big beef tomato that is my one slicer baby, and hopefully that doesn't knock my phone over. That would be funny. But hello, what's up? What's up? Do you want to say hi to the live stream? Nope. Trent came out here, my son. So, we're continuing with our book, and we have 2 chapters this week, and then we have 3 chapters next week, and we're going to be all finished with The Horse and His Boy. So cool. It's been nighttime here for at least an hour or two. Yeah, I would imagine it is, being as you're 3 hours ahead of me, so I would expect it to be nighttime at 11, but you never know. You could be in Alaska. All over the place, Michelle. Isn't even your name. See, Trent ran away. Looks like he's running around outside. You can see him looking at me. But, yeah, it's been really hot here, too. Like, it was in the 90s today. It's supposed to be 95 on Friday. I'm just, yeah, my name is Ray. That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah. But I just read what's like Ron Burgundy. I read what's in the thing here. So. What you doing?
Coming out here to cool off.
Yeah, it's starting to cool down. Not nearly as hot. Well, you can.
It's 85 degrees in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably still about 82, 83 out here, so it's still pretty warm, but it's getting better. Okay, well, I'm going to read for story time, okay? You're welcome to stay and hang out.
Okay.
Whatever you want. Just remember that if you go behind me, you're going to be on the camera. Okay? Silly kid. He's funny. So, chapter 11. The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. This is the right chapter 11, right? Now that oh yeah. Yeah, chapter 11. Barbazina, you made it! Hey! Haven't started reading yet. I started early, so just some ramblings in my garden in the first part. But, yeah, get this going. Chapter 11, The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. When Shasta went through the gate, he found a slope of grass and a little heather running up before him to some steps. He had nothing to think about now and no plans to make. He had only to run, and that was quite enough. His limbs were shaking. A terrible stitch was beginning. Young Love 4020, hey! His limbs were shaking. A terrible stitch was beginning in his side, and the sweat that kept dropping into his eyes blinded them and made them smart. He was unsteady on his feet, too, and more than once he nearly turned his ankle on a loose stone. The trees were thicker now than they had yet been, and in the more open spaces there was bracken. The sun had gone in without making it any cooler. It had become one of those hot, gray days where there seemed to be twice as many flies as usual. Shasta's face was covered with them. He didn't even try to shake them off. He had too much else to do. Suddenly he heard a horn, not a great throbbing horn like the horns of Tashbaan, but a merry call, "Tee-ro-tee-to-to." Next moment he came out into a wide glade and found himself in a crowd of people. At least it looked like a crowd to him. In reality, there were about 15 or 20 of them, all gentlemen in green hunting dress with their horses, some in the saddle and some standing by their horses' heads. In the center, someone was holding the stirrup for a man to mount, and the man he was holding it for was the jolliest, fattest, apple-cheeked, twinkling-eyed king you could imagine. As soon as Shasta came into sight, this king forgot all about mounting his horse. He spread out his arms to Shasta, his face lit up, and he cried out in a great deep voice that seemed to come from the bottom of his chest, "Corin, my son, and on foot, and in rags! What?" "No," panted Shasta, shaking his head. "Not Prince Corin. I know I'm like him. Saw His Highness in Tashbaan. Send his greetings." The king was staring at Shasta with an extraordinary expression on his face. "Are you King Loon?" gasped Shasta, and then, without waiting for an answer, "Lord King, fly! Anvard, shut the gates! Enemies upon you! Rabadash and 200 horse!" "Have you assurance of this boy?" asked one of the other gentlemen. "My own eyes," said Shasta. "I've seen them, raced them all the way from Tashbaan." "On foot?" said the gentleman, raising his eyebrows a little. Of course there would be a dog barking. "Horses with the hermit," said Shasta. "Question him no more, Darren," said King Loon. "I see truth in his face. We must ride for it, gentlemen. A spare horse there for the boy. You can ride fast, friend." For answer, Shasta put his foot in the stirrup of the horse which had been led toward him, and a moment later he was in the saddle. He had done it 100 times with Bree in the last few weeks, and his mounting was very different now from what it had been on that first night when Bree had said that he climbed up a horse as if he were climbing a haystack. He was pleased to hear the Lord Darren say to the king, "The boy has a true horseman's seat, sire. I'll warrant there's noble blood in him." Zulu won! Hey, what's going on? So glad you made it. "His blood, aye, there's the point," said the king, and he stared hard at Shasta again with that curious expression, almost a hungry expression in his steady gray eyes. But by now the whole party was moving off at a brisk canter. Shasta's seat was excellent, but he was sadly puzzled what to do with his reins, for he had never touched the reins while he was on Bree's back. But he looked very carefully out of the corners of his eyes to see what the others were doing, as some of us have done at parties when we weren't quite sure which knife or fork we were meant to use, and tried to get his fingers right. But he didn't dare to try really directing the horse. He trusted it would follow the rest. The horse was, of course, an ordinary horse, not a talking horse. But it had quite wits enough to realize that the strange boy on its back had no whip and no spurs and was not really master of the situation. That was why Shasta soon found himself at the tail end of the procession. Even so, he was going pretty fast. There were no flies now, and the air in his face was delicious. He had got his breath back, too, and his errand had succeeded. For the first time since the arrival at Tashbaan, how long ago it seemed, he was beginning to enjoy himself. He looked up to see how much nearer the mountain tops had come. To his disappointment, he could not see them at all, only a vague grayness rolling down toward them. He had never been in mountain country before and was surprised. "It's a cloud," he said to himself. "A cloud coming down. I see. Up here in the hills one is really in the sky. I shall see what the inside of a cloud is like. What fun!" I've often wondered. Far away on his left, and a little behind him, the sun was getting ready to set. They had come to a rough kind of road by now and were making very good speed. But Shasta's horse was still the last of the lot. Once or twice, when the road made a bend, there was now continuous forest on each side of it. He lost sight of the others for a second or two. Then they plunged into the fog, or else the fog rolled over them. The world became gray. Shasta had not realized how cold and wet the inside of a cloud would be, nor how dark. The gray turned to black with alarming speed. Yeah, if it starts getting dark, I mean, this is definitely the time that mosquitoes will be out, so I might have quite a few mosquito bites tomorrow, but, you suffer through for the production, I guess. Someone at the head of the column winded the horn every now and then, and each time the sound came from a little farther off. He couldn't see any of the others now, but of course he'd be able to as soon as he got round the next bend. But when he rounded it, he still couldn't see them. In fact, he could see nothing at all. The horse was walking now. "Get on, horse, get on," said Shasta. Then came the horn, very faint. Bree had always told him that he must keep his heels well turned out, and Shasta had got the idea that something very terrible would happen if he dug his heels into a horse's sides. This seemed to be an occasion for trying it. "Look here, horse," he said, "if you don't buck up, do you know what I'll do? I'll dig my heels into you. I really will." The horse I will read books until I die. They can pry the book out of my cold, dead hands. The horse, however, took no notice of this threat. So Shasta settled himself firmly in the saddle, gripped with his knees, clenched his teeth, and punched both the horse's sides with his heels as hard as he could. The only result was that the horse broke into a kind of pretense of a trot for 5 or 6 paces and then subsided into a walk again. And now it was quite dark, and they seemed to have given up blowing that horn. The only sound was a steady drip drip from the branches of the trees. Well, I suppose even a walk will get us somewhere sometime, said Shasta to himself. I only hope I shan't run into Rapidash and his people. He went on for what seemed like a long time, always at a walking pace. He began to hate that horse, and he was also beginning to feel very hungry. Presently he came to a place where the road divided into two. He was just wondering which led to Anvard when he was startled by a noise from behind him. It was the noise of trotting horses. Rapidash, thought Shasta. He had no way of guessing which road Rapidash would take. But if I take one, said Shasta to himself, he may take the other, and if I stay at the crossroads, I'm sure to be caught. He dismounted and led his horse as quickly as he could along the right-hand road. The sound of the cavalry grew rapidly nearer, and in a minute or two Shasta realized that they were at the crossroads. He held his breath, waiting to see which way they would take. There came a low word of command. Halt! Then a moment of horsey noises, nostrils blowing, hoofs pawing, bits being champed, necks being patted. Then a voice spoke. Attend, all of you, it said. We are now within a furlong of the castle. Remember your orders. Once we are in Narnia, as we should be by sunrise, you are to kill as little as possible. On this venture you are to regard every drop of Narnian blood as more precious than a gallon of your own. On this venture, I say, the gods will send us a happier hour, and then you must leave nothing alive between Cair Paravel and the western waste. We are not yet in Narnia. Here in Archenland it is another thing. In the assault on this castle of King Lune's, nothing matters but speed. Show your mettle. It must be mine within an hour, and if it is, I give it all to you. I reserve no booty for myself. Kill me every barbarian male within its walls, down to the child that was born yesterday, and everything else is yours to divide as you please. The women, the gold, the jewels, the weapons, and the wine. The man that I see hanging back when we come to the gates shall be burned alive. In the name of Tash the irresistible, the inexorable, forward. With a great cloppity-clop the column began to move, and Shasta breathed again. They had taken the other road. Shasta thought they took a long time going past, for though he had been talking and thinking about 200 horse all day, he had not realized how many they really were. But at last the sound died away, and once more he was alone amid the drip-drip from the trees. He now knew the way to Anvard, but of course he could not go there. That would only mean running into the arms of Rabadash's troopers. What on earth am I going to do? Said Shasta to himself. But he remounted his horse and continued along the road he had chosen, in the faint hope of finding some cottage where he might ask for shelter and a meal. He had thought, of course, of going back to Erebus and Bree and Wynn at the Hermitage, but he couldn't because by now he had not the least idea of the direction. After all, said Shasta, this road is bound to get somewhere. But that all depends on what you mean by somewhere. The road kept on getting to somewhere in the sense that it got to more and more trees, all dark and dripping, and to colder and colder air, and strange icy winds kept blowing the mist past him, though they never blew it away. If he had been used to mountain country, he would have realized that this meant he was now very high up, perhaps right at the top of the pass. But Shasta knew nothing about mountains. I do think, said Shasta, that I must be the most unfortunate boy that ever lived in the whole world. Everything goes right for everyone except me. Those Narnian lords and ladies got away safe, from Tashbaan. I was left behind. Erebus and Bree and Win are all snug as anything with that old hermit. Of course, I was the one who was sent on. King Loon and his people must have got safely into the castle and shut the gates long before Rabadash arrived. But I get left out. And being very tired and having nothing inside him, and felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. What put a stop to all this was a sudden fright. Shasta discovered that someone or somebody was walking beside him. It was pitch dark and he could see nothing, and the thing or person was going so quietly that he could hardly hear any footfalls. What he could hear was breathing. His invisible companion seemed to breathe on a very large scale, and Shasta got the impression that it was a very large creature. And he had come to notice this breathing so gradually that he had really no idea how long it had been there. It was a horrible shock. It darted into his mind that he had heard long ago that there were giants in these northern countries. He bit his lip in terror, but now that he really had something to cry about, he stopped crying. The thing, unless it was a person, went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope he had only imagined it. But just as he was becoming quite sure of it, there suddenly came a deep, rich sigh out of the darkness beside him. That couldn't be imagination. Anyway, he had felt the hot breath of that sigh on his chilly left hand. If the horse had been any good, or if he had known how to get any good out of the horse, he would have risked everything on a breakaway and a wild gallop. But he knew he couldn't make that horse gallop, so he went on at a walking pace, and the unseen companion walked and breathed beside him. At last he could bear it no longer. "Who are you?" he said, scarcely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Its voice was not loud, but very large and deep. Are you a giant?" asked Shasta. "You might call me a giant," said the large voice, "but I am not like the creatures you call giants." "I can't see you at all," said Shasta, after staring very hard. Then, for an even more terrible idea had come into his head, he said, almost in a scream, "You're not something dead, are you? Oh, please, please do go away. What harm have I ever done to you? Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." Once more he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face. "There," it said, "that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows." Shasta was a little reassured by the breath, so he told how he had never known his real father or mother, and he had been brought up sternly by the fisherman. And then he told the story of his escape, and how they were chased by lions and forced to swim for their lives, and of all their dangers in Tashbaan, and about his night among the tombs, and how the beasts howled at him out of the desert. And he told about the heat and thirst of their desert journey, and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Erebus. Also how very long it was since he had had anything to eat. "I do not call you unfortunate," said the large voice. "Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There was only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there were at least two the first night, and there was only one, but he was swift of foot." "How do you know?" "I was the lion." And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued, "I was the lion who forced you to join with Erebus. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile, so that you should reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at midnight, to receive you." "Then it was you who wounded Erebus?" "It was I." "But what for?" "Child," said the voice, "I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own." are you?" asked Shasta. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low so that the earth shook, and again, "myself," loud and clear and gay, and then the third time, "myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it, and yet it seemed to come from all round you as if the leaves rustled with it. Shasta was no longer afraid of the voice, afraid that the voice belonged to something that would eat him, nor that it was the voice of a ghost, but a new and different sort of trembling came over him. Yet he felt glad, too. The mist was turning from black mosquitoes. The mist was turning from black to gray, and gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing he had not been noticing anything else. Now the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead he could hear birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and ears and head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw, pacing beside him, taller than the horse, a lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else it could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. Basque Bear, hey! Thank you. I'm quite enjoying my garden stream tonight. Yeah, it's just super hot in my house, and I didn't want to deal with it, so figured I'd sit outside. Oh, but thank you. Luckily, Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Kellerman to have heard the tales that were whispered in Tashbaan about a dreadful Narnian demon that appeared in the form of a lion. And of course, he knew none of the true stories about Aslan, the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, the king above all high kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at its feet. He couldn't say anything, but then he didn't want to say anything, and he knew he didn't need to say anything. The High King, above all kings, stooped toward him. Its mane and some strange and solemn perfume that hung about the mane was all round him. It touched his forehead with its tongue. He lifted his face, and their eyes met. Then instantly the pale brightness of the mist and the fiery brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory and gathered themselves up and disappeared. He was alone with the horse on a grassy hillside under a blue sky, and there were birds singing. Chapter 12: Shasta in Narnia. Was it all a dream? Wondered Shasta. But it couldn't have been a dream, for there in the grass before him he saw the deep, large prints of the lion's front right paw. It took one's breath away to think of the weight that could make a footprint like that, but there was something more remarkable than the size about it. Bird. As he looked at it, water had already filled the bottom of it. Soon it was full to the brim and then overflowing, and a little stream was running downhill, past him over the grass. Shasta stooped and drank, a very long drink, and then dipped his face in and splashed his head. It was extremely cold and clear as glass, and refreshed him very much. After that he stood up, shaking the water out of his ears and flinging the wet hair back from his forehead, and began to take stock of his surroundings. Apparently it was still very early morning. The sun had only just risen, and it had risen out of the forest which he saw down low and far away on his right. The country which he was looking at was absolutely new to him. It was a green valley land dotted with trees through which he caught the gleam of a river that wound its way roughly to the northwest. On the far side of the valley there were high and even rocky hills, but they were lower than the mountains he had seen yesterday. Then he began to guess where he was. He turned and looked behind him and saw that the slope on which he was standing belonged to a range of far higher mountains. Yeah, it's starting to get dark around here. I think my phone brightens it up a little bit, but yeah, it's getting there for sure. I mean, I'm surrounded by trees, so it gets darker. Um, it seems like it gets darker quicker when you're in the trees. But yeah, it's definitely getting there. Probably have enough light to finish this chapter, so we'll be good. I see, said Shasta to himself. Those are the big mountains between Archenland and Narnia. I was on the other side of them yesterday. I must have come through the pass in the night. What luck that I hit it! At least it wasn't luck at all, really. It was him. And now I'm in Narnia. He turned and unsaddled his horse and took off its bridle. Though you are a perfectly horrid horse, he said. It took no notice of this remark and immediately began eating grass. That horse had a very low opinion of Shasta. Hey, Doc Michael, what's happening? I wish I could eat grass, thought Shasta. It's no good going back to Anvard. It'll all be sieged. I'd better get lower down into the valley and see if I can get anything to eat. So he went on downhill. The thick dew was cruelly cold to his bare feet, till he came into a wood. Yeah, I would totally live in a tree house. Hell yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I would definitely live in a tree house. I mean, I'm gonna live in an RV, and I wanted a tiny house, so like I would live in a yurt. I'd live in an ecodome, in a hobbit hole. Yeah, there's so many great ways to have a house that aren't in suburbia. There was a kind of track running through it, and he had not followed this for many minutes when he heard a thick and rather wheezy voice saying to him, "Good morning, neighbor." Shasta looked round eagerly to find the speaker, and presently saw a small, prickly person with a dark face who had just come out from among the trees. At least it was small for a person, but very big indeed for a hedgehog, which was what it was. "Good morning," said Shasta, "but I'm not a neighbor. In fact, I'm a stranger in these parts." "Ah," said the hedgehog inquiringly, "I've come over the mountains, from Archenland, you know." "Ah, Archenland," said the hedgehog. "That's a terrible long way. Never been there myself." "And I think, perhaps," said Shasta, "someone ought to be told that there's an army of savage Calormenes attacking Anvard at this very moment." "You don't say so," answered the hedgehog. "Well, think of that. And they do say that Calormen is hundreds and thousands of miles away, right at the world's end, across a great sea of sand." "It's not nearly as far as you think," said Shasta, "and oughtn't something to be done about this attack on Anvard? Oughtn't your High King to be told?" "Certain, sure, something ought to be done about it," said the hedgehog, "but you see I'm just on my way to bed for a good day's sleep. Hello, neighbor." The last words were addressed to an immense biscuit-colored rabbit whose head had just popped up from somewhere beside the path. The hedgehog immediately told the rabbit what it had just learned from Shasta. The rabbit agreed that this was very remarkable news and that somebody ought to tell someone about it with a view to do something. And so it went on. Every few minutes they were joined by other creatures, some from the branches overhead and some from little underground houses at their feet. Till the party considered all 5 rabbits, a squirrel, 2 magpies, a goat-foot fawn, and a mouse, who all talked at the same time and all agreed with the hedgehog. For the truth was that in the Golden Age, when the witch and the winter had gone and Peter the High King ruled at Cair Paravel, the smaller woodland people of Narnia were so safe and happy that they were getting a little careless. Perfectly, however, two more practical people arrived in the little wood. One was a red dwarf whose name appeared to be Duffel. The other was a stag, a beautiful lordly creature with wide, liquid eyes, dappled flanks, and legs so thin and graceful that they looked as if you could break them with 2 fingers. "Lion alive!" roared the dwarf as soon as he had heard the news. "And if that's so, why are we all standing still chattering? Enemies at Anvard! News must be sent to Paravel at once. The army must be called out. Narnia must go to the aid of King Loon." "Ah," said the hedgehog, "but you won't find the High King at the Care. He's away to the north trouncing those giants. And talking of giants, neighbors, that puts me in mind." "Who'll take our message?" interrupted the dwarf. "Anyone got more speed than me?" "I've got speed," said the stag. "What's the message? How many calormenes?" 200, under Prince Rabadash, but the stag was already away, all 4 legs off the ground at once, and in a moment its white stern had disappeared among the remoter trees. "Wonder where he's going," said a rabbit. "He won't find the High King at Paravel, you know." "He'll find Queen Lucy," said Duffel, and then, "Hello, what's wrong with the human? It looks pretty green. Why, I do believe it's quite faint. Perhaps it's mortal hungry. When did you last have a meal, youngster?" "Yesterday morning," said Shasta weakly. Yeah, exactly the same here, Michelle L. Yeah, they're saying that Delta is wreaking havoc, and yeah, our mandates are going back into place, I think, tomorrow. Yeah, it's great. It's crazy. I'm very tired of it, for sure. Come on then, come on," said the dwarf, at once throwing his thick little arms round Shasta's waist to support him. "Why, neighbors, we ought all to be ashamed of ourselves. You come with me, lad. Breakfast, better than talking." With a great deal of bustle, muttering reproaches to itself, the dwarf half led and half supported Shasta at a great speed further into the wood and a little downhill. It was a longer walk than Shasta wanted at that moment, and his legs had begun to feel very shaky before they came out from the trees onto bare hillside. There they found a little house with a smoking chimney and an open door, and as they came to the doorway, Duffel called out, "Hey, brothers, a visitor for breakfast." And immediately mixed with a sizzling sound there came to Shasta a simply delightful smell. It was one he had never smelled in his life before, but I hope you have. It was in fact the smell of bacon and eggs and mushrooms, all frying in a pan. "Mind your head, lad," said Duffel a moment too late, for Shasta had already bashed his forehead against the low lintel of the door. "Now," continued the dwarf, "sit you down. The table's a bit low for you, but then the stool's low too. That's right, and here's porridge, and here's a jug of cream, and here's a spoon." By the time Shasta had finished his porridge, the dwarf's 2 brothers, whose names were Rogan and Bricklethumb, were putting the dish of bacon and eggs and mushrooms, and the coffee pot, and the hot milk, and the toast on the table. It was all new and wonderful to Shasta, for Calormene food is quite different. He didn't even know what the slices of brown stuff were, for he had never even seen toast before. He didn't know what the yellow soft thing they smeared on the toast was, because in Calormene you nearly always get oil instead of butter. And the house itself was quite different from the dark, frosty, fish-smelling hut of Arshish and from the pillared and carpeted halls in the palaces of Tashbaan. The roof was very low, and everything was made of wood, and There was a cuckoo clock and a red and white check tablecloth and a bowl of wildflowers and little curtains on the thick-paned windows. And it was also rather troublesome having to use dwarf cups and plates and knives and forks. This meant that helpings were very small, but there were a great many helpings, so Shasta's plate or cup was being filled every moment, and every moment the dwarfs themselves were saying, "Butter, please, and another cup of coffee," or "I'd like a few more mushrooms," or "What about frying another egg or so?" And when at last they all had eaten as much as they possibly could, the three dwarves drew lots for who would do the washing up, and Rogan was the unlucky one. Then Duffel and Bricklethumb took Shasta outside to a bench which ran against the cottage wall, and they all stretched out their legs and gave a great sigh of contentment, and the two dwarfs lit their pipes. And the dew was off the grass now, and the sun was warm. Indeed, if there hadn't been a light breeze, it would have been too hot. "Now, strangers," said Duffel, "I'll show you to the lie of the land. You can see nearly all South Narnia from here, and we're rather proud of the view. Right away to your left, beyond those near hills, you can just see the western mountains, and that round hill away to your right is called the Hill of the Stone Table. Just beyond—" Mongo's musing. "Appreciate you, Dottie, listening to you while watching for meteors," allegedly. Well, I mean, meteors are real, but, they're just, like, I'm not sure. I mean, they're just going around the firmament, or they're just, they're not from 6 kajillion light years away. Like, that's definitely not what's happening. But, yeah, meteors are real. So I kind of laugh now watching stars, because I always used to watch for satellites when I was young, and now when I see them, I'm just like, well, yeah, there's probably a satellite up there, but it's probably a satelloon. Definitely not something orbiting, rocketing around us, but yeah. But at that moment he was interrupted by a snore from Shasta, who, what with his night's journey and his excellent breakfast, had gone fast asleep. The kindly dwarves, as soon as they noticed this, began making signs to each other not to wake him, and indeed did so much whispering and nodding and getting up and tiptoeing away that they certainly would have waked him if he had been less tired. Yeah, it's starting to get dark out here. Let's see. I think we only have a couple pages left. Yeah. I think I should make it. I'm trying to read fast. He slept pretty well nearly all day, but woke up in time for supper. The beds in that house were all too small for him, but they made him a fine bed of heather on the floor, and he never stirred or dreamed all night. Next morning they had just finished breakfast when they heard a shrill, exciting sound from outside. "Trumpets!" said all the dwarves, as they and Shasta came running out. The trumpets sounded again, a new noise to Shasta, not huge and solemn like the horns of Tashbaan, nor gay and merry like King Loon's hunting horn, but clear and sharp and valiant. The noise was coming from the woods to the east, and soon there was a noise of horse hoofs mixed with it. A moment later the head of the column came into sight. First came the Lord Paradan on a bay horse, carrying the great banner of Narnia, a red lion on a green ground. Shasta knew him at once. Then came 3 people riding abreast, 2 on great chargers and 1 on a pony. The 2 on the chargers were King Edmund and a fair-haired lady with a merry face, who wore a helmet and a mail shirt and carried a bow across her shoulder, and a quiver full of arrows at her side. "The Queen Lucy," whispered Duffel. But the one on the pony was Corin. After that came the main body of the army, men on ordinary horses, men on talking horses, who didn't mind being ridden, on proper occasions, as when Narnia went to war, centaurs, stern, hard-bitten bears, great talking dogs, and last of all 6 giants. For there are good giants in Narnia. But though he knew that there on the right side of Shasta, at first could hardly bear to look at them. There are some things that take a lot of getting used to. Just as the king and queen reached the cottage and the dwarfs began making low bows to them, King Edmund called out, "Now, friends, time for a halt and a morsel." And at once there was a great bustle of people dismounting and haversacks being opened and conversation beginning when Corin came running up to Shasta and seized both his hands and cried, "What, you're here? So you got through all right. I am glad. Now we shall have some sport, and isn't it luck? We only got into the harbor at Cair Paravel yesterday morning, and the very first person who met us was Chirvy the stag with this news of an attack on Anvard. Don't you think?" "Who is your highness's friend?" said King Edmund, who had just got off his horse. "Don't you see, sire?" said Corin. "It's my double, the boy you mistook me for at Tashbaan." "Why, so he is your double!" exclaimed Queen Lucy. "As like as two twins. This is a marvelous thing." "Please, your majesty," said Shasta to King Edmund, "I was no traitor, really I wasn't, and I couldn't help hearing your plans, but I'd never have dreamed of telling them to your enemies." "I know now that you were no traitor, boy," said King Edmund, laying his hand on Shasta's head, "but if you would not be taken for one another time, try not to hear what's meant for others' ears, but all's well." After that there was so much bustle and talk and coming and going that Shasta for a few minutes lost sight of Corin and Edmund and Lucy. But Corin was the sort of boy whom one is sure to hear of pretty soon, and it wasn't very long before Shasta heard King Edmund saying in a loud voice, "By the lion's mane, Prince, this is too much. Will your highness never be better? You are more of a hard scald than our whole army together. I'd as leave a regiment of hornets in my command as you." Shasta wormed his way through the crowd, and there saw Edmund, looking very angry indeed, Corin looking a little ashamed of himself, and strange dwarf sitting on the ground making faces. A couple of fawns had apparently just been helping it out of its armor. "If I had but my cordial with me," Queen Lucy was saying, "I'd soon mend this, but the High King has so strictly charged me not to carry it commonly to the wars and to keep it only for great extremities." What had happened was this. As soon as Corin had spoken to Shasta, Corin's elbow had been plucked by a dwarf in the army called Thornbutt. "What is it, Thornbutt?" Corin had said. "Your Royal Highness," said Thornbutt, drawing him aside, "our march today will bring us through the pass and right to your royal father's castle. We may be in battle before night." "I know," said Corin. "Splendid." "Splendid or not," said Thornbutt, "I have the strictest orders from King Edmund to see to it that your highness is not in the fight." "You will be allowed to see it, and that's treat enough for your highness's little years." "Oh, what nonsense!" said Corin. "Of course I'm going to fight. Why, the Queen Lucy's going to be with the archers." "The Queen's Grace will do as she pleases," said Thornbutt. "But you are in my charge. Either I must have your solemn and princely word that you'll keep your pony beside mine, not a half a neck ahead, till I give your highness leave to depart, or else it is his majesty's word we must go with our wrists tied together like two prisoners." "I'll knock you down if you try to bind me," said Corin. "I'd like to see your highness do it," said the dwarf. This was quite enough for a boy like Corin, and in a second he and the dwarf were at it hammer and tongs. It would have been an even match, for though Corin had longer arms and more height, the dwarf was older and tougher. But it was never fought out. That's the worst of fights on a rough hillside. For by very bad luck, Thornbutt trod on a loose stone, came flat down on his nose, and found when he tried to get up that he had sprained his ankle, a real excruciating sprain which would keep him from walking or riding for at least a fortnight. "See what your highness has done," said King Edmund, "deprived us of a proved warrior on the very edge of battle." "I'll take his place," said Corin. "Pshaw!" said Edmund. "No one doubts your courage, but a boy in battle is a danger only to his own side." At that moment the king was called away to attend to something else, and Corin, after apologizing handsomely to the dwarf, rushed up to Shasta and whispered, "Quick, there's a spare pony now and the dwarf's armor. Put it on before anyone notices." "What for?" said Shasta. "Why, so that you and I can fight in the battle, of course. Don't you want to?" "Oh, yes, of course," said Shasta, but he hadn't been thinking of doing so at all, and began to get a most uncomfortable prickly feeling in his spine. "That's right," said Corin. "Over your head. Now, the sword belt. But we must ride near the tail of the column and keep as quiet as mice. Once the battle begins, everyone will be far too busy to notice us." And that is the end, my friends, and it's getting quite dark out here, so I'm going to have to end this and head out. We have some quick shout outs here. Basque Bear, Michelle L, Singeman, Mongo's Musings, Doc Michael, Sue Finelli, Singeman, Carrie Skates, Kirk Wilson, Zulu One, Young Love 4020, and Barbara Zena. Hello to you all. Thank you so much for being here. It's been Storytime with Dottie. Much love. See y'all on the flat side.